Today, we are presenting how business owners can mash up the business model canvas with 4Q's frameworks. Many business owners are aware of the business model canvas, and a few know about the power of the 4Qs. What you may not be aware of is how useful it is to mash the two frameworks together. I have with me on this podcast a man who is familiar with both frameworks, going to teach us how it's done, and in a moment, show us 3 ways we can mash up the business model canvas on the 4Qs. Welcome, Allen Pattiselanno.
Hey, Anthony. Thanks for the invite.
Allen, you're most welcome. Before we dive in, I have a question I'm going to ask you. Where did the inspiration for the business name Agile Donkeys come from?
Yeah, I get that a lot. It started as a joke, but I like and respect donkeys. Funny fact about donkeys, as far back as ancient Greece, donkeys were described as stupid and lazy. However, when we are on a treacherous mountain trail, our perception of this same animal changes. Suddenly, we see the donkey as sure-footed, strong, and intelligent. And really, when you're on a mountain trail, would you want a clumsy donkey?
Right. Well, Allen, tell us a little bit about yourself, the kinds of projects you've done with clients over the last 12 months.
Well, I've been in the digital industry since I left college in the early 1990s. I'm an old guy. I've worked from very small startups to large organizations, including the Singapore government, in various roles. COVID has challenged many of my assumptions and priorities. I'm currently spending most of my time working with seniors and small business owners in our community to help them gain digital skills.
Well, why don't we ask you to give our audience a crisp 30-second explanation of the business model canvas?
Business Model Canvas, or BMC, is a visual tool to show how a business creates value for itself while developing products and services for its customers. I like the BMC because it gives business a common platform to visualize their current and/or future business model. It is not a one-time exercise, but rather a living document that should be revisited on a regular basis.
Yeah. And during my research, I discovered there's the business model canvas, and there's this other entity called the business model navigator. What's the difference between the two?
The business model navigator is another approach to evaluate business models. The authors have identified 55 specific types of business models that they believe represents 90% of successful business globally. And then they provide a framework for readers or users to categorize and adapt their own business models to fit in to one of these 55 ideal models.
Great. And Allen, you have like 5 years experience using the business model canvas. You've rolled it out to a couple of organizations. I figure that makes you a veteran. Tell us, is there any shortcomings of the model?
BMC has its limitations. Very often, we can map the current state of a business, but it becomes very difficult for me to coax the client to identify their next business model. I felt 2 things were missing in the BMC. The first is a structure to interrogate the business model. For a while, I was using a modification of the McKinsey 7S, but I wanted something simpler and more natural, which I can use in a workshop setting. I've been looking for alternatives, and that was when you and I connected. The first thing that was missing in the BMC is a reminder of who the business is and what they represent. These are the shared beliefs. They need to form a cornerstone of any business plan. Too often, organizations get distracted and embark on a journey that has nothing to do with who they are, and then are surprised that it fails. Previous to our conversation, this was relegated to a discussion under the 7S framework, but it needed to come up front, be the center of the conversation.
Yeah, it's quite critical. I mean, I was quite surprised when you pointed that out. I mean, the 4Qs obviously has a whole quadrant allocated to who we are. While we're perhaps on the subject of the 4Qs, why don't you give us a 30-second overview of the 4Qs decision-making framework?
Yeah, I have to admit, Anthony, when you first sent me the link to your book, I was wondering, why would Anthony send me a book about a sales system? And then we had a conversation, right? And you linked it to digital transformation. And then boom, the light bulb went off in my head. The 4Qs provide us with 4 distinct quadrants or windows in an organization. 1, who we are. 2, what we serve. 3, who we serve. And 4, how we serve it. The 4Qs educate people about their roles and processes within the business, right? And how it touches a customer. These are also key questions we ask in digital transformation.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, you're in fact one of the very first digital transformation practitioners to use the 4Qs. I know you've only been using it for a few months, and you've already figured out how the business model canvas and the 4Qs frameworks come together. I know previously you used SWOT. You were also using the McKinsey's 7S. So why did you start using the 4Qs?
Think of BMC as a base. I then use various tools as lenses to guide my clients in their understanding of where they are and what needs to change. When I started my digital transformation workshops, I had used 7S as a framework to get the stakeholders to think about the changes they needed to make to become the organization they wanted. The 7S framework has 7 elements. It was complex, and we often got bogged down by operational details, important but not relevant for our purpose. When you introduced me to 4Qs, I saw a structure for me to interrogate the BMC and to follow up with actionable items.
Alan, I know you and I have been very busy creating some diagrams together. The first one that we have to share with the listeners is a workflow that we've mapped. It's like a day in the life of this digital transformation practitioner, Allen Pattiselanno. Do you mind just explaining to us what it's like in your consulting business, how we move through these 1, 2, 3 stages? Thank you.
Basically, we will do a 1 to 2 day workshop. The first session of the workshop will be to come up with the organization's current business model. We will then refine it using various tools and framework like SWOT and 4Qs to come up with a second business model canvas. For some organizations, I would end the engagement by providing them with a playbook to continue the process at the strategic level as well as the operations level, because these changes need to be filtered through the entire organization.
This is interesting because when I first pitched the 4Qs to you, I thought you might start off using like the first BMC with SWOT, then go into the 4Qs and then present the 4Qs to your customer. Interestingly, you seem to like to do a first BMC and then a second BMC, which shows the current state and the future state, right? What's the reasoning for that?
I do everything on a digital platform, right? So be it PowerPoint or something else. I would then print in a live copy of the first BMC. Now I'll put it on the wall for everyone to see. I'll then put the second BMC, which represents their ambition, and I'll put it side by side so that they can see where they are at, they can visualize what needs to be done, and they can understand that this is an ongoing journey. It is not a project. Because this BMC needs to be revisited again and again and again, because change is constant.
Okay, grand. So let's get now into the second diagram that we've created together. Why don't we get laser focus? We'll blow up what the second business model canvas looks like. This is, in fact, our mashup. What strikes me immediately about your mashup is how you dealt with the missing shared beliefs piece. Could you explain to us a few other decisions you've made? For example, many of the categories of the business model canvas have been mapped to quadrant 4.
Your viewers who are familiar with the BMC would realize that my BMC has one additional section, right? Shared values or beliefs. I've spoken about the importance of shared values guiding a business, and I feel that it needed to be captured somewhere on the canvas. That's why I have it there in the corner, because it is a cornerstone of the conversation. And this literally needs to be shared with the stakeholders, because sometimes stakeholders are stuck in their own silos and may not see the big picture, and thus are not aligned with the organization's shared values.
Right.
Now, some of the BMC categories were very easy to map to the 4Qs. So customer segment maps very nicely with Q1, right? Who we serve. Q2, or what we serve, right? To me, and we had this discussion, right? Is the value proposition plus the resources and activities that goes into producing that value. Added to that are the cost and revenue associated.
Why do you think other digital transformation practitioners and business advisors, why do you think they should adopt the BMC mashup with the 4Qs?
My approach was born out of a necessity of being a small practice with very limited support. I needed something comprehensive yet manageable without having my own team of dedicated domain experts to support me. BMC allowed me to give a top view of the business today and where it should be in the future. But many of these are based on assumptions, and I use tools like SWOT, 4Qs to challenge or refine those assumptions.
Well, would you mind giving us like a small demo of how the mashup works? How about you show us, say, 3 of your best practices? Talking to you earlier, here they are. First is address who we are. The second is how valuable is change. And lastly, we have adapt to the situation. So, okay, Alan, walk us through each one,
Sure.
starting with addressing who we are.
The first best practice, right, as you mentioned, address who we are. That came about, again, from the idea of shared beliefs. Shared belief, like I say, is a cornerstone, and I will keep harping on it. It is a cornerstone. If you don't know the beliefs of an organization, all decisions made consequently will be voided. There was one time I was in a discussion with stakeholders about a business model for their new venture in Cambodia.
Right.
And the suggestion of cultivating cannabis as a medicine for foreign tourists popped up. Would it have been successful? Perhaps. I don't know, right? But the key question was, is this really who the organization is? Is this something that they want to be associated with? These are questions that they need to answer for themselves, right? And in any workshop, this question can be lost because they get carried away by maybe an idea, an exciting idea. And that's why in our revised BMC, right, we have that shared belief upfront as a reminder, because an organization in this same situation would look at it and say, this is a great idea, but it is not who we are.
Yeah, if we're looking at this through the lens of the 4Qs, you're really talking about a quadrant 1-2 fit. And while that is essential for making revenue, the quadrant 1-3 fit is really important long term, because what that is going to enable you to do is, rather than simply just create any kind of medical clinic that's out there, is it will start to, the beliefs which you have, the reasons that you get up every morning to come to work in quadrant 3, the CEO, the C-level people, the shareholders, and the staff all sharing the same belief begins to impact the kinds of decisions that you make in quadrant 2. And so what happens is that your competitors don't really understand, because the type of product that begins to evolve, the decisions that you're making along the way to govern your product roadmap, are essentially coming from your quadrant 1-3 fit. If you don't have that, we're never going to create something that's really truly differentiated.
Yeah, Anthony, I remember in your book, right, you mentioned that a belief held by an individual is not to be confused with shared belief. We need to test it as early as possible if that belief is felt by the whole organization or just that one person. It is very easy for a CEO of a company to think that his belief is shared by the entire organization. But as you and I know, right, that is not true very often.
Yeah, I mean, the example I can think of in recent history was a CEO that decided, okay, we're agile, right? And they spent an inordinate amount of time outside of the organization briefing the public relations department, advertising agencies to go out and start educating customers that they're now agile. And they spent absolutely no time sharing this belief with staff. And in this situation, what happened was staff really didn't understand how the belief translated as value to the customer. And so they sort of just went about their business, actually quite ignoring all of this communication that was happening outside of the organization, such that when customers eventually did respond to the campaign, they had a very negative experience because what they discovered was once they pierced that marketing veneer, that external facade, they're met with the same old processes, the same people. Nothing had changed at all. They felt, in fact, probably betrayed. Beliefs, and in fact, shared beliefs are operationally really difficult because they have to be outside as well as inside.
The senior management might have a vision, but when it's not shared with the rest of the organization, when they feel that they're not part of it, when they have no ability to change anything, right? They will either do what they've been doing, because inertia will take them that way, or they will sabotage the attempt.
Good one. Okay, let's have a look at the second best practice you've got lined up for us today. It's how valuable is the change? I suppose this is getting down to like ROI. Like, tell us a little bit about this best practice.
Unfortunately, digital transformation has become a term that we use very loosely. But digital transformation, in essence, calls for the use of digital technology as an enabler to transform a business in their delivery of values to their customers. When we are looking at the new BMC, I am looking at least two changes. Okay. Either one, the customer segment change from the previous BMC. Two, the value proposition change. Three, how the value proposition is produced changes. Or four, revenue or cost structure change. At least two of these must change. If only one of them change or none of them change, then the whole exercise to me is not worth doing. So just changing a process, right? To digitize one workflow process. But if it doesn't connect with a strategy, then it's not digital transformation.
Your litmus test seems to resonate with how DX folk I know are using the 4Qs. One of the goals that they have is to serve the customer of tomorrow. So they want digital transformation to help them reach a new customer that they're not serving today. So they can use the 4Qs to help them strike a quadrant 1-2 fit. And the 1-2 fit establishes exactly what you've just described, which is like the customer segment and the value proposition, and then how the value proposition is produced. And what's interesting is I can tell really quickly when I look at someone's 4Qs, if they've struck a quadrant 1-2 fit, the ROI or the outcome is revenue is generated. If you have you can have a customer and you can have a product. But if you never get these two to fit with the right value proposition, you're never going to reach revenue. Let's have a look at your next best practice, which is called adapt to the situation. This one's pretty interesting. It's about how you use the BMC. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your third practice?
Some folks who are not familiar with the BMC, it can be a bit overwhelming. 9 separate sections, right? And 10 with my new shared values. But and sometimes I'll get a sense of it when I speak to them and when I share the information with them in my in the early conversations. If that is what I'm seeing, then what I will do is I will focus on just 3 segments. Right? First, not that I'll forget the other 7. The first segment that I will look at is shared values. The second, customer segment, and the third, the value proposition. Let us just start talking about those, which they should be very familiar with, that they should be very comfortable talking about. And then from there, I will derive the other parts of the BMC.
The same applies to, the 4Qs, like when we do executive planning, that, our 4Qs canvas can get pretty messy and unstructured. So one of the ways we addressed this was we created a playbook a couple of weeks ago. I know that you've been using it, and it helps project owners derive a quadrant 1-2 fit and a quadrant 1-3 fit. If they essentially can achieve these 2 fits using the playbook, they have essentially covered the 3 starting points that you mentioned in the BMC. When I first pitched the 4Qs to you, I figured that you'd be most interested in the quadrant 1-4 fit. Okay, so 4 being how we serve, right? And how we serve is really interesting for digital transformation practitioners because it details the precise number of interactions required to create a customer, right? All the way from the moment you speak to them, to onboarding, to after sales service and support. And quite frankly, I thought that that's where the emphasis of this podcast would be about, how transformation comes from technology and affects these interactions in quadrant 4, hence a quadrant 1-4 fit. Miraculously, though, it's been actually all about quadrants 1, 2, and 3.
If you get your quadrant 1-2 wrong, if the fit is wrong or your quadrant 1-3 fit is wrong, there's no point talking about the rest because you're going to get the whole thing wrong. To me, this is foundational.
I think you've uncovered one of the reasons why digital transformation can fail is because too many organizations will skip the 1-2, the 1-3 fit. Just skip to 1-4 fit. Go, okay, who's our existing customer? How do we use digital transformation just to improve the way in which we serve them right now, how we serve them, okay? But that doesn't uncover the other facets or the other problems that are within the business that you've looked at when we look at a quadrant 1-2 and a quadrant 1-3 fit.
Some organizations come in with a technology solution already in mind. That's why they're looking at the quadrant 1-4 fit.
Yeah, and so many times those software companies they're kind of siloed. They're siloed in a 1-4 fit. They really are. They're siloed in 1-4.
They are, yeah.
Like they don't want to hear about the 1-2 or the 1-3 because they don't have the expertise.
They don't care.
Their software doesn't talk about or address those problems. And so essentially they just want to turn a blind eye to that and say, well, we delivered the software. The rest of it is your problem.
Yes.
Fantastic. Now, Alan, you've in fact got a 4th best practice up your sleeve. I understand we don't have time to talk about it on our podcast today. I'm going to pop it on the blog post so our listeners can find out more about it by taking a look in the description below. Or perhaps we could just, rather than describe it, just let them know the name of the best practice. So what's the name of your 4th best practice? What are you calling it?
Okay, Anthony. So the name of it is Create Many Versions. Right.
Wow, folks, that's all you're going to get. Our lips are sealed. You'll have to take a look at the blog post to take a look at what Alan has to say about his 4th best practice. Alan, it's been a dream having you on the show today. Really, really interesting stuff that's come out. I really like that last part that we just talked about, this 1-4 silo. That's quite interesting. We hope to hear more about the business model canvas and the 4Qs mashup in the future. Thank you.
Hey, Anthony, the pleasure is all mine. I really enjoy our sessions together, and I look forward to meeting you in person, one day, be it in Thailand, in Singapore, or maybe anywhere in the world. Yeah.
We have to be patient, Alan. It could be a couple of years away.
Yeah, that's the new reality, right?